Johnny Stewart. Some say the greatest driver in Australian speed car history. A winner of 3 national championships and countless races over a career spanning nearly 20 years. Johnny was a champion in an era when on average 2 drivers a year lost their lives chasing speed car racing glory. The same era that 20,000 fans regularly attended the races either at the Sydney Showgrounds, Westmead or Windsor circuits. It was an era when the daily tabloids made the stars of the day front page news. Johnny Stewart was and still is in the eyes of many a true superstar. His story is one of sheer brilliance, courage and bravery. This is his story.
Well, I was born in 33, so I guess about 24, thereabouts. And in fact, I had no idea I'd do it, you know, and Len Brock said, why didn't you try and drive that? So I was out of the paddock up at the Strathfield somewhere, I forget now. And I drove it, and he said, oh, that wasn't bad, Len said. And from then on, I got interested in the whole idea. And later on, of course, I met Hedley McGee. And at that stage, I went to Victoria and bought the car. In fact, 3 were brought out from the States in pieces, and they were assembled down in Victoria. So I bought one of those, which I put a Holden in. In fact, I won the first race with it at Westmead, now a hospital. And when Hedley saw it, he said, that is too big, you know, big crank, big bores. They threw it away, put the ordinary Holden. Later on, he designed the fuel injection type of setup and the tank on the side with the oil instead of the sump. And we went on, and it got better and better, and it went better. And I won that number 1, because my old number was 98, you know. So, which I got off the Yankees, I might add. But anyway, I won number 1 with the Holden. There was quite a few Aussies. Bob Tassel was there, and quite a few of them. I think of him because he was always here, and he always went well, and there was plenty to say, and you know Bob, I'm sure. Anyway, I won the one then, and they said, well, Ray Revell, he's dead at the time, so the number's available. If you want it, you can have number 1. Well, I won it the next, 3 years in a row, driving offies after that. And again, I missed a year, and then I won the game. So I suppose the 60s were our hardest, perhaps, times. Well, I used to try and run up behind the car, and if I could, go wider and use the outside of the track. Mostly they tried to stay near the grass, so you had that on the fence was close to you and was the longest way around, but at least you knew you were fairly safe, provided it didn't hit the fence, you know, it worked.
Riding the High Line may have worked for Johnny Stewart. For dozens of others, however, it was a brush with death, sustaining horrific injuries that ended many careers. Johnny Stewart and his fellow racers were a special breed, men that demonstrated a rare degree of skill and daring. Roll cages were never considered, in an era when anyone suggesting such drastic measures would surely be labelled a sissy. Stewart sustained many bone-crushing injuries, injuries that are still fresh in this old warrior's mind. Did you have very many big accidents? Do you remember your worst accident, let's say at the Sydney Showground?
There was that many. It'd be hard to say which one, but well, probably I broke my neck twice, you know, and numerous punctured lungs and broken ribs and this, that, and that, because I'm all here. But
was that at the Showground?
mostly, that and Westmead and what was the track up at
Windsor?
Windsor, yeah. I started to race there with stock cars, mind you.
That's where it all started, in stock
Yeah,
cars.
yeah, indeed. I had, well, 73 was my number, and I went quite well though. So, in fact, I drove at Bankstown at the track there, which is a rather wild track, you know. But nevertheless, I did. And eventually, of course, midgets, and once you start, you can't stop.
They were very special days in speed car racing, very, very dangerous days as well. What was it that made men go to the Speedway every Saturday night and risk their life driving race cars without roll cages?
Well, personally, I think we earned more money in those days than perhaps do now. And mind you, you could go out and race on Saturday night. You could win the feature race, win so much money, and do nothing all week, you know, and you'd come out perhaps in front of someone else.
How often did you think about the danger? Did it worry you?
Yes, it worried me, but mind you, I never thought it'd be me, you know, always someone else.
Is there any one driver that stands out in your mind as being the hardest man to beat that you used to continually consider your danger man week in, week out?
Well, always I thought of Bob, naturally. We had probably 6 or 7 from the States that they didn't stay long. Bob used to come every year, you know. I got to know him quite well. And in a way, he was the one you worried about because he knew what he was at and he always did it right. And if something went wrong, he'd go right off his brain, you know. He taught me about peanuts. One day he was in the pits and someone had peanuts in their hand, put their foot on his tyre, so he loaded his car and went home before the race because he didn't like finding peanuts. So I'm the same. So it's something I learned. But when you talk about Sydney drivers, or should I say people belong to Sydney, I think of Freeman. Naturally, I do.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about Freeman there. He was very sadly killed whilst he was driving in a sport that he loved so much.
I know.
And you were blamed for that accident, weren't you? What's the story there?
Well, we were very close together at the time, I mean. It was at the end of the straight at Westmead, near the gates, and he was on the outside, and mind you, there was mud packed up against the fence to get it off the track, because it rained, you know, that morning. And unbeknownst to me, he caught one wheel in the mud, which made the car flip the wrong way. But I did a full lap before I found out. Everyone said, "You did that." Well, how could I ever say I didn't, you know? There was a lot of trouble over that. Because naturally we never got along, you know? And yet, at times, I've slept in the same room over in Perth with him. And we've shaken hands, and everything's been fine. But not until something happened, no.
I'm sure that the respect that you had for one another as competitors was mutual. So I guess it's fair to assume that that particular occasion when Jeff Freeman was sadly killed has really haunted you.
It did for quite a while. In fact, I got skeletons in the mail and coffins in the mail and all sorts of things like that. A lot of people believed that was something I did myself, you know, which I didn't do, but I couldn't tell them that. They thought I must have, and I've got rid of him, and now I can go and do what I want to do. And every time I won the number one the next year, I thought, what if Jeff was here, you know? So I used to think of it, yeah.
Jeff Freeman was one driver that was sadly killed. There was many others. As a race car driver in those days, what used to go through your mind when that happened? Did you feel like giving it all away?
Well, I used to think of Jeff as someone I had to beat. Because once he got past you, that was it, you know. Off he went and he won the race, and whatever might happen after that. The day that he had his accident at Westmead, someone up in the eye, they were in the locals anyway, and they took a film of the actual happening of the accident, and I wasn't any closer than about a foot from his front wheel to my back wheel. So because of that film, I guess that's how I got out of trouble, because that was shown to the police, they saw it, I said, well, fair enough, it didn't touch, you know. Mind you, there wasn't much in it.
Just a racing accident?
Yeah. It took me a lap to find out, and then, even then, I wasn't sure who it was.
It may have taken him a lap to find out, but this was to be an incident that Stewart would never forget. Freeman was a truly great race car driver, who, like Stewart, was able to win races from seemingly impossible positions. Both drivers were fierce rivals, engaging in wheel-to-wheel combat week in, week out. Freeman's outside pass at Westmead on that dreadful Sunday afternoon was Mother's Day 1965. That pass was sadly Freeman's last. To many it signalled the end of a golden era. In the meantime, Stewart battled on tenaciously.
You can't stop.
In retrospect, John, now that you look back, we're now into the era of the 90s in speedway racing. Right across the world, roll cages play an integral part of speedway motorsport, and all motorsport for that matter. Do you believe now that it was the right thing to do to install roll cages on cars, or do you think that that danger factor that was there in your day, the fact that it's now been taken from the sport, has possibly cost us some of the crowd support?
Well, I think it's done that all right. The crowd has dropped from what used to be 25 down to about 5 or 6, perhaps. It was dangerous. I think during the period I was racing, about 1.8 per year was killed in Sydney. Nowadays, with the cages, the wings, I don't think anyone has really been hurt, not properly, unless they put their hand outside, because they've got straps now that hold the arm, you know. Oh, well, I agree with them now. When I saw them, I thought, nah.
Yeah, the cars are a fair bit quicker now, aren't they?
Well, my fastest time around the showground was 18.9 seconds. And I don't think there's anything faster.
Johnny, what about your preparation leading up to a race meeting? Let's hypothetically say that you were racing this Saturday night at the showground. You'd obviously put a lot of time in on preparing the car to make sure it was right. But what about Johnny Stewart's mental preparation? Being a champion driver, as you undoubtedly were, with very few peers, did you have to psych yourself up much, or did it just come naturally to go out and be aggressive?
Well, I was always nervous. It didn't matter what happened, you know. And I'd look at the sky and think, is it going to rain, you know? I hope it does, we won't race. And all those type of things.
Is that true? You actually used to hope it would rain so you didn't race? Amazing.
We didn't have to go. Cars stayed in the garage, you know. But we used to work on it all day long, I suppose. Do this, do that, do something else. And it didn't matter what wanted, even if it wanted nothing, you'd find something. You'd do something, you know. And that is why, in those days, you had the time to work on the car, because you earned enough money on Saturday night to allow you to do that, which, believe me, I don't think I'd do it now.
What's the favourite racetrack that you've raced on over the years? You've been right around Australia.
Showground.
No argument.
No, I had to laugh when you said that. No, I raced on pretty near each track in Australia, I suppose. Mind you, the one in Perth was quite big, but mind you didn't know how deep it was, you know. It could be anything three times as wide. And then you go to Brisbane, things were smaller. The track was a third of a mile and deep at one end, slick at the other end. So everything was different. But you got to know it all, but yes, I liked the showground. Mind you, it looked smaller the other night.
Well, Johnny, it's well known by everybody that to be successful in motorsport, you've got to spend a lot of time preparing your car. In order to do that, you must have a fairly flexible job to allow you to do that. What were you employed as during your heyday?
I tried to do most things. I went to the abattoirs, I learnt all about that, and kill them, hang them up, and I sold cars.
What was the best part, killing them or hanging them up?
I didn't like it at all. In fact, when my father was there and I said, well, how's that? He said, you know everything. It's great, I'm leaving on Friday. So I did. So I mainly played around with cars, car sales, old cars. Spraying was something I took up. I was rather keen on spraying cars. And I had a couple of places that sprayed them for people, you know, and that was one of my main jobs, I suppose, spraying cars. Once the speed car came along, all you could think of was, how do I fix the car, you know? Poor old Headley, I drove him mad, you know. I'd see McGee and I'd say, what are you going to do this week? He'd say, never mind, it'll be right. Well, it was. Well, yes, if I concentrated on one particular type of work and worked on that alone, and didn't worry about the old speed car, I'd do it a lot better than I did, you know. I taught people to drive cars, I was a driving instructor. I've done almost anything you can think of, I suppose. So, meanwhile, once I'd start something, someone would say, why did you try that? Sure enough, I'd go and try that, you know, start again. Meanwhile, I kept winning races.
Johnny, you've said twice during this interview that the speed car drivers in your day were financially better rewarded than they are now, perhaps in the 90s. Do you believe that the sport in the 90s is heading in the right direction, or do you think, quite frankly, it's not?
Well, yeah, I think it's in the right direction, all right, but what I used to buy for $2,000, they're paying about $40,000 for the same thing, and they take their workshop with them, like with a spare diff and a spare this and a spare... We never did that. You just take the car and a trailer and that was it, you know. They put a lot more work into it, a lot more people.
That's interesting. You really didn't take too many spare parts motor racing with you in those days?
Didn't take any.
Why is that? Were they stronger in those days and didn't break as easily, or what?
Well, the idea was you didn't break them, you know. But I remember Headley changed the gasket on the Holden ones in between races. So he put a new gasket on, fixed it, put it together, back I went out the next race. It took him about 17 minutes from start to finish.
Astonishing. That's not too bad.
That's Headley and his two sons, Philip and Chris, I think.
Since you've retired from racing, who's the best Speedway driver that you've seen?
What now? That'd be a hard question to answer because I've only been, 3 times in so many years. No, I couldn't answer that one right at the moment.
I suppose Gary Rush would have to be one that would come to mind. He's been an outstanding champion, hasn't he?
I consider him to be one of the old ones, you know. I don't consider him a new one. But certainly going well. Mind you, he was pretty wild in the first place. But he's calmed down now.
What about George Tatnall?
Well, like myself, I think he should give it away, you know. He's done everything. So, believe me, his sons are doing just as well, if not better. One of them, anyway. So, I do think he should give it away now.
The fabulous sport of speed car racing owes a great deal not just to Johnny Stewart, but all drivers who pioneered this spectacular form of open-wheel racing. Speedway authority and leading historian Dennis Newlyn remembers the great old days with fond affection.
I think the era of the 60s was so special because it brought together so many talented drivers at the one time. I mean, it was just a unique era in Australian speedway history, and it's probably fair to say it's an era that we will never ever see again. There was just so many talented drivers in Australian speedway racing, and Australian speed car racing was highlighted by the fact that you had Johnny Stewart, Jeff Freeman, Len Brock, so many talented drivers, you know, Murray Hoffman from South Australia, Ray Revell, of course, you know, Johnny Harvey. I mean, just incredible, the talent that was around in the era of the 60s. Well, the first time I saw Johnny Stewart compete was in 1957 at the Bankstown Speedway. He drove a stock car, a cut-down version, car number 73. And even then, he was the man. He was the standout performer. I mean, it was the bash and crash era of stock car racing in Australian speedway. The great era of the speed cars was about to unfold in the next few years. But Johnny Stewart really stood out in those days. An unbelievably talented driver that even when he was in the early years driving stock cars, really stood out. They were fearless. I mean, the risks were high. There was no question of that. I mean, they were like, as I say, World War II fighter pilots. I mean, they had that bravado attitude. I mean, okay, they had to participate in a race meeting, but they knew full well what was on the line. I mean, it was a very dangerous era, and for that, their bravery, I guess you could say, the accidents were enormous. There were some horrendous accidents, and yet you would see an example of Johnny Stewart involved in an accident and would be back competing the next week. It was part of the job. It was an occupational hazard, and incredibly, they just got on with the job of driving cageless speed cars. And as I say, I liken them to World War II fighter pilots. I mean, it was like they'd go out on an assignment or a mission, but you never quite were sure what the outcome was going to be.
Johnny, what does Speedway need to do to get back to the situation of having 25,000, 30,000 people there every weekend? I mean, obviously the fact that the showground venue is no longer open just for one lousy meeting a year because of some bureaucratical politics in town. We have a Speedway in Sydney now, Parramatta. It's the only one in Sydney in real terms. Struggles to get 3,500 people there. Why?
You know, I've often thought about that because I've thought, where they all go? It could be because there's some other kind of entertainment. Mind you, everything's, back in my days, it was 60 cents to go to the showground. Now it's about $18, you know. Well, that had happened. And, of course, in those days, the kids didn't pay. Now they do. There's a lot of things to stop people. And nothing's happening any different to what it was before. So, I guess too much money, too much cost, too many children, so it's going down. I don't know how you'd fix that, really. If you put on a different show, maybe so.
Maybe the guy's coming from behind again, just as it used to be in your day.
Well, I wasn't going to say it, but there's something I thought, yeah.
I think you and I agree on the same fact there. It's pretty important.
See, in the old days, if you started at the back, they'd know damn well you were trying to win. That meant you had to pass everybody. Everyone through the track, you had to do all that. So they knew it as well. So if you got through, you passed everyone. If you start at the front and win, well, it was given to you, you know. That's my way of saying it.
Arguably one of the most famous Johnny Stewart cars. This is the potent six-cylinder fuel-injected track burner. With sponsorship coming from McGee Racing Cams and Champion Plugs, Stewart then became one of the first Australian race car drivers to obtain personal backing from the petroleum giant Shell. The car was purchased in May 1964 from a man called Orb Cherry. With the help of Hedley McGee and his 18-year-old son Philip, the track burner was born, propelling Stewart to superstar status almost overnight. In this car he won his second consecutive national title, a car that would draw massive crowds whilst on display in shopping centres Australia-wide.
Well, I bought the car from Orb Cherry, that was in Victoria, and I think it was actually built over in perhaps Adelaide. I'm not sure about that, but mind you, he bought the chassis, the parts, and everything was put together out here. That Holden shouldn't be there, but he is now, and because he used like V860s, I never had one, but he liked them, and I know the car was meant for a V860 originally, but I always had the Holden, which is later on fuel injected, did everything right, you know. And if it didn't break down, it went, put it that way. And well, if it did break down, you'd think, well, that happened next week, you know, leave it till next Saturday night. That's in the summer, of course, Saturday night. During the winter, we used to go up to Westmead, run the track up there during the Sunday afternoon that was, in the winter time. So raced it pretty near every week. Sometimes I'd run in 3 states in the one weekend, you know, like Queensland, down to Sydney, and off to Victoria or Adelaide, and you'd be finished in the end, you know, you'd had enough, you hadn't been asleep. But, well, there's no better car as far as I'm concerned. Well, I liked this one, I really did. Admittedly, it got warmer, and in fact rather hot at times, and sometimes the offie didn't get so hot because of different type of matter, and in fact going slow would make them too cold, whereas this was the other way, you know, the temperature would go up. But yes, I like this one. The old Holden, I know, but I liked it. I used to talk to it at home, you know, and sometimes I feel like I was talking back to him. There was no one else there. Mind you, I didn't do it in front of people. But yes, I did. I liked the car a lot. And I feel it like me, so better idea. First race, well, that was Westmead. And in fact, it won the first race. It was still as it was painted in Victoria. And I brought it up the day before and thought, I wonder how this will go, you know. Mind you, it won its first race. I'm in the feature race. And later on I found that motor was perhaps oversized, you know. And of course I got the Holden and then eventually the injection and so on and so on and so on. But it kept going. It always kept going. I made some terrible messes of it. I know it was my fault, you know. But that's why the roll bar is on the front, to protect the injection. See the bar on the front? I put that there to protect the motor and the injectors and all that stuff in case she's upside down. Why I didn't think of me, I don't know, but I was thinking of the engine when I did it, the injection anyway. The best race I had in this car, in fact it was my last race, was at the showground, and I looked at the race and I was starting at the rear of the field. I thought, well, I can't, you know, I'd love to win it because number 1 was important. And everything went right. I put twin tyres, they were even, 2 550s on the back, you know. I thought, everyone said, that won't work, you know. So I tried it, and it did everything right. And the more it did it, the better I felt. In fact, I'd lapped most of the field. In fact, I eased up at the end. Mind you, it was pretty hot. Like another lap or two, and she would have blown up in smoke, I guess, or steam, I mean. In fact, it did after I stopped it in Middle East Dean, and I just got out in time. I'm very happy.
But Peter Boland in car 4 is sticking to the outside, and it attempts to pass Kevin Park while Queenslander Blair Shepherd hugs the inside line. With 37 points to catch on Len Brock, Stewart is wasting little time dealing with traffic problems. He takes the 25 laps to go signal and is already running 5th in the race after starting from position 16. The big question has yet to be answered. Can Stewart's car continue to set this blistering pace for the remainder of the event? There's plenty of heavy dirt on the outside, and Stewart's McGee Shell track burner is handling like a dream. Bruce Newlyn still leads after 6 laps in car 68, but Sid Clark and Peter Boland are pressing him hard. Stewart moves on the tail of Shepherd's Offenhauser and is challenging for 4th. He's in for a hard fight though, as these two drivers have had duels in the past, and this time the Queenslander wants to come out on top. Back in the field, Lenny Brock is trying desperately to improve his position in car 65, but is having trouble passing Valentina and Offenhauser 23. The Shepherd-Stewart duel still goes on, and although Stewart tries for an inside run on Shepherd, it's Shepherd who comes onto the back straight first. Eight laps gone, and here's Len Brock making a game move at the back of the pack. He passes Valentina, which moves him to 10th, and is carrying on underneath teammate Sid Middlemas. Just touches the grass as they come onto the back straight. Brock is out after Stewart, who is still trying to find a way of passing Shepherd in 99. One-third of the race already gone, and Shepherd is still holding down 4th. Here's Stewart making a run on the outside of the Queenslander, and he passes him neatly as the two drivers hit the back straight. Back in the field, Brock is still charging in car 65. He refuses to give in and follows Sid Middlemas around the outside of Marshall. Leadfoot Len has now started his run, and there are only 3 cars between him and Stewart. Coming onto the back straight, Brock positions himself for a pass and dives under Middlemas. He's gained yet another position and is now only 2 positions behind Stewart. Stewart in car number 1 is chasing the heavy dirt after the leaders, but is having trouble shaking Shepherd loose from his tail. Middlemas is causing embarrassment further back in the field and has pulled off a major upset by repassing Brock on the outside in car 2. Middlemas's car has more power in the straights, but Brock's number 65 is handling better in the corners. Lou Marshall follows Brock through again as he positions his machine to pass Middlemas in the straight. Middlemas goes high into the corner, and Brock once again regains 7th position. Early Sid Clark in car 51 has taken over the lead from Newlyn, but the challenges are coming thick and fast. Peter Boland in car 4 and Johnny Stewart have closed on the rookie, but he won't shift an inch. Stewart accelerates underneath Boland in the top corner and moves into 3rd position, but Boland is not giving in without a fight. In the pit corner again, and Boland passes Stewart on the outside and attempts to give Newlyn a little more speed moving into the main straight. Stewart once again moves on the inside of Boland, but is having no end of trouble passing Newlyn. While the front runners are being held up with heavy traffic, Len Brock continues to set a blistering pace. Brock's car is handling beautifully, and he has little trouble lapping Brian Mannion on the outside. Frustrated Johnny Stewart moves to the outside in an attempt to improve his position, and he finally passes Newlyn with an electrifying burst of speed. Stewart has now moved into 2nd place, but is more than 150 yards behind the leader Sid Clark, who was well out in front and having an armchair ride in car 51. made up the leeway on Clark. Clark is a hard man to pass on the showground track and won't be forced into errors. The two drivers move up to lap John Hunt, and Clark pulls out wide, forcing Stewart to follow him through. Marshall is trying every trick in the book to improve his position in the field, but can't find a way of passing Middlemiss in number 2. This is Middlemiss's first drive in the Burko Holden, and he's not the least bit worried about Marshall and his points problem. The pace is a cracker, and already Queenslander Bill Good has pulled out. South Australia's Gordon Benning is still trying hard, but his engine is tiring badly, and he's already dropped out to last. Only 4 laps remain in the 30-lapper, and the race, it's between Clark and Stewart. Stewart is slowly but surely wearing Clark down, and the two of them have cleared right out from the rest of the field. Clark and Stewart into the back straight, and I think he's got him. Stewart hits the front with 2 laps to go, and do you think his car isn't running like the wind? He laps Mannion up for the 4th time and is already starting to pull away. Marshall and Middlemiss are still hard at it further back in the pack, while Brock refuses to give up the chase after Stewart. He's still back in 7th place and has been losing ground considerably over the past 2 laps. Here comes the field onto the back straight, but Stewart is right on their tails. He's already taken the yellow flag and could even lap Marshall before the finish. Flagman Jack Matthews gives the yellow to several cars. Stewart pours into the straight to take the sign of victory, the checkered flag. Stewart wins the New South Wales State round of the National Championship from Sid Clark and Peter Boland, and looking further back through the field, Len Brock has come home 7th, just ahead of Sid Middlemiss and Lou Marshall. This big crowd at the Sydney Showgrounds, well in excess of 33,000, are giving Stewart a tremendous ovation as he comes down the back straight on his victory lap and heads towards the finishing line. Officials, promoters and fellow competitors race to shake Stewart's hand. His car bursts forth steam as the motor is switched off, and the young driver climbs from the cockpit elated. He's just driven the race of his life and has good reason to be happy. Big speedway races reap big rewards, and Stewart accepts the National Championship trophy as well as a cheque for $1,200. His total prize money tonight should exceed $2,000, the largest amount ever earned by an Australian driver for one race. Len Brock, runner-up to Stewart in the National Series, receives his award, a cheque for $500. Place getters in the championship pose before taking off on their victory lap. And so the 1965-66 Craven Filter National Championship Series is over. In sponsoring this annual competition, WD and H.O. Wills had one great objective in view, and that was to foster and improve speed car racing.
Yes, I think it was, you know. Like from then on, I realised that now I've won that one, I've got to keep going. So I had no choice, you know. You've got to go. So I did. And I guess I could easily say this car did it for me, that particular race, back in 64, 5, 6, wherever it was, you know. But I could watch the gauge. I knew damn well it was too hot, you know. I thought, how much longer, how much longer? It just did it, just in time. So I'm glad there wasn't another 2 laps. She would have gone right at the end, because the needle was bent, you know, like as far as she could go. Anyway, I was rather happy with it. In fact, when it was sold, that night, in fact, I thought to myself, why'd you do that, you know? So that answers the question, why did I do it? George Sadnell took the car the night they won the race. Mind you, I only told him what I had to tell him, nothing more than that, you know. And he was rather keen to get it, and quite honestly, I thought I was giving him something perfect, you know. And to me it was. And I guess he went pretty well. He bent it too, you know. A lot of people bent this car. In fact, it makes me wonder why it's still here, really, because everything has happened to this car. But as far as I know, anyone that's ever owned the car has gone pretty good at it. even with the Holden in the front of it, driving this car was better than a lot of offies that have come from the States. It could still beat those now and again. With a bit of luck, you know.
Johnny Stewart made his own luck. Former driver Gordon Benny and friend Roger Jenkins are two men responsible for Stewart's remarkable fight back to health. We recently spoke to Benny, himself a great driver, and Roger Jenkins, who has restored Stewart's beloved track burner back to its former glory.
Well, Brian Forrest and myself found the car at Ron Liddell's, and we offered him to buy the chassis and some of the other components of the car from him, and he agreed upon it. We got it in a wooden box, and then we had to put it together. We did make some of the components that we didn't receive, and between Brian Forrest, Scott Jenkins and myself, this is the finishing product. It took us 8 months to do it, and a lot of nights we stayed back and worked till all hours of the night, and as we got to the end of it, we got keener and keener. We could see it coming together very nicely, so we even made us put a bigger effort into it. And we were just so proud when it was finished, and I had a very proud moment when I took it down to John when he was in hospital and showed him the car.
I was very pleased when I first saw the car. I thought, how do they do that, you know? Because it just looked exactly the same, you know. I looked at the car and thought, that's it, you know. It's got to be right, everything's right. Everything looked to be in the same place, you know. I was very happy, and naturally, of course, I'd naturally been sick, of course, and to find the car back like it always was, looking the same way, and there it was ready to go, made me very happy indeed. And he's done such a wonderful job on the car. Quite honestly, I'm not sure how he's done it, but he's done it, because he's the car, and it feels the same, looks the same, probably goes the same.
Gordon Benny clearly recalls his first impressions of the famous Sydney Showground, the very venue where his lifelong friendship with Johnny Stewart began.
Well, the first time I went to the showground was the 66 Craven A that we've been talking about. It was all the race that it was built up to be. I didn't do very well in it. I had a lot of problems. I went into it, I think, in 3rd spot in the Craven A, and I came out in 5th spot. But the first time I met Johnny, I think, was possibly in Tracy Speedway in Melbourne a few years before. We met him a few times in Adelaide, but when we got to the showgrounds, we knew who was the king. That was John. He was the man to beat. We had the Canines, we had the Brocks. Well, you could always meet your measure with them, you know. There was, but when you came with John, he was a clean driver. He made no fuss, but he just got the job done. And you know, all credit to him. I love this car too, like John does. I had an opportunity to drive it 2 years ago at the showground, and I know now why he won.
Well, the 60s to me, and Johnny Stewart's involvement in the 60s, I think probably, as I said earlier, it was just a unique period of time, an era we'll never see again. Johnny Stewart was such a personality. His coverage in the newspapers, and after the death of Jeff Freeman, the stories, it wasn't a sporting story, it then became a story in the news content in the newspapers. Like here, Johnny Stewart was receiving these death threats, and it was on the front page of the Sun newspaper one afternoon. So I mean, he was not just a sporting personality, he was a personality in Sydney. So it's all those kind of things. The 60s to me meant a lot. I look back on those days, the memories of the 60s with great memories, fond memories. I really feel that I'd love to be able to go back in time, like if I could borrow Rod Taylor's time machine and crank it back to around the beginning of the year of the 60s. I'd love to do that, and it just meant a lot to me, the 60s. The memories, the massive crowds at the Sydney Showground, the great races, the great drivers, the personalities, the television coverage, the newspaper coverage. Just tremendous, and I really think we'll never see it again. I mean, it was just a unique era of Australian Speedway history, and it's gone forever.
Throughout years of blood, sweat and tears, Johnny Stewart could always be rest assured that his wife of 25 years, Dot, would be right there beside him. Well, Dot, you were by your husband's side right throughout his magnificent racing career. I heard you say a little while ago that you could never watch the first corner. Tell me about that.
Well, he always started at the back, and I thought, oh my goodness. So the woman next to me, I said to her, I'll close my eyes until the first corner, and once it gets past all that mob, then I can look and watch it then, but never watch the first corner because that's when all the accidents happened.
So was that the only part of the race that you really used to worry about, or were you always on edge right throughout the race?
I was always nervous, yes, very nervous, but...
And what about all the travelling that John did to Perth 5 or 6 times? You used to go all the time?
Yes.
You used to love it?
Yes, loved it.
Would you have done anything else? I mean, if you had your time with John all over again, starting off together as man and wife, would you do it again?
Yes, I would.
Anything you regret?
No, nothing.
Do you look back with fond affection? I mean, at the age of 57 that you are now, how often do you reflect on the great old days?
I'd do it again, I think. I know that I'd be a lot better off if I didn't, but I'd do it again, yeah.
Why would you be better off if you didn't?
Well, so many things wouldn't have happened, you know.
2 broken necks for a start.
Exactly.
What about the financial side of it? It's not cheap, is it?
No, mind you, I still think it was better then than it is now, but it made the day and made things work, and I own my own restaurant, and I own my own this and that, and so everything went right. I guess perhaps I'm the only one that went wrong. Like, if I'd have done things the right way, it'd be a lot better off than it is.
Your speed car racing career, can you sum it up in one word? If that's possible, or a shorter word it's as possible anyway. What did your career behind the wheel of speed cars mean to you?
Well, the way it's worked out, I couldn't want it any better, and I'd probably do it again.
There was Len Brock, Jeff Freeman, the Caneen brothers, Lou Marshall, of course the late great Bobby Tattersall, and many, many others. It is highly unlikely that any driver in speed car racing history will ever leave the indelible stamp on this great sport than the one left by Johnny Stewart. The pages of history will show the man grabbed life by the throat and drove his way into the hearts of every Australian. Johnny Stewart will always be a national idol. Johnny Stewart, a true blue champion.